What up, folks? Jiu-Jitsu here. I'm excited to be back at it. And today we have the legend, excuse the expression, Eli Knight, Professor Knight from Knight Jiu-Jitsu. I'm sure you've seen him on YouTube, Instagram, and hopefully he's inspired you like he's inspired me. So let's get started. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good, good. Yeah, I know we've connected recently, and I'm really happy to get started and pick your brain because I've been watching your videos since 2019 before I started jiu-jitsu, and then I always go back to them. And I know there's a lot of fun things out there, but I really like your take and interpretation on comparing like maybe just the self-defense side from the sports jiu-jitsu side and just giving a lot of input and ways for people to grow and develop. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I appreciate the kind words. That's awesome.
Cool. So, I guess if you want to take a second, you want to just kind of talk about your background a little bit, and we can just take it from there.
Yeah. I'm Eli Knight. I've been doing martial arts for over probably about 35 years, I guess. And I started in a lot of different things. Whenever I was able to actually get with competent martial artists around me, like beyond just Taekwondo, then I was doing lots of different stuff. Filipino martial arts. I was doing boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, judo, even Aikido. I know that you've got an Aikido background, and I did Aikido for several years and really enjoyed that. And I always kind of poke fun at it for different reasons, but
Same.
I have a soft spot in my heart for it. But yeah, whenever I came across, I was already training jiu-jitsu, but it was more of a Japanese style. Whenever
Right.
the UFC came out in the 90s and around 93, and we saw, we kind of saw the complexion of that jiu-jitsu versus what we were doing as more traditional, like Japanese style jiu-jitsu and judo. And so, like so many other people, we became, I and my training partners and my teacher at the time too, all kind of became obsessed with this whole Brazilian jiu-jitsu, Gracie jiu-jitsu thing. So we started to go and learn that everywhere that we could, whether it was through seminars or camps or whatever. And that was kind of the beginning of it. And so I stuck with that for 3 decades of my life doing this kind of jiu-jitsu now, and absolutely still in love with it to this day. It's got there's so many different facets to it, like you mentioned, the self-defense versus the sport, but it's I like to see the cross comparison of how techniques and methodologies and strategies and everything else can change between different modes of jiu-jitsu. So I consider there to be like four kind of applications of jiu-jitsu or modalities, and that would be like from most rules to least rules, would go like gi jiu-jitsu, and then no gi jiu-jitsu, and then MMA, and somewhere in there kind of hybrid things like combat jiu-jitsu, but then MMA, and then essentially self-defense or street fighting, whatever that looks like. And it's cool to see techniques that can work in every one of those modes with minor to intermediate modification to the technique. So I think that's fascinating. That's what kind of keeps me going, so I don't get like bored or burnt out on anything. And it's also one of the fastest evolving martial arts. It's constantly evolving. The more people that get their hands on it and their brains working on it, it's so cool. Like I've been watching No-Gi Worlds this weekend, and I'm just sitting there watching, like, good Lord, look at that entry. Like I didn't think about that. I never would have thought about that kind of entry. It's like the way that people are doing, using these leg entries to work into sweeps and wrestle ups, and just it's crazy the innovation that's constantly happening with it. It's really cool to watch.
That's nice. I want to touch on a couple of things, but the last thing you mentioned, talking about innovation, I find, and you may have experienced this in other arts you practice, where I felt like jujitsu is so open and less specific
Mm-hmm.
because, and I'll speak to Aikido a little bit because that's the where I spent the most time. It was usually like an instructor style or brand that you sort of had to stick to. My last instructor, the late Donovan Waite Sensei, had a lot of like room for us to be creative, but we still sort of tried to move in that same framework. But I felt like when I came to jujitsu, the challenging part for me was asking my coaches, like, okay, you want me to do an armbar? Like, is it this way? And it's like, hey, make it work. Like, here's the principles, you got to make it fit your body. So I
Yeah,
felt like there was a lot more room for making the technique tailored to you as opposed to it just being looking a certain way and having very, very, very like mirror details. Like I have to move this way, like my instructor. So I don't
right.
know if you experienced that or if you kind of saw that, and if you want to talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of traditional martial arts that's kind of a traditional martial art framework. So traditional martial arts being ones that have I don't even know what that means exactly because jiu-jitsu is a traditional martial art. It's just that
Right,
people tend to think about the modern complexion of it in sport and competition. But it's
right,
the I think it's important to have to some degree a stylized framework in the beginning because you have to have something.
right,
You can't just say okay, well, here's an arm and break it. Like it's like here's techniques, here's ways of doing it. It's like if I'm going
right,
to attack a hinged joint, I know that I'm going to have to like isolate the adjacent like ball and socket joint. If I'm going to attack a ball and socket joint, I've got to create a bend in the arm, like this 90-degree bend or something typically. And same on leg locks, same on, and then on chokes, it's like I have to know what exactly I'm doing. Is this more of a choke? Is it more of a strangle? Is this more air or blood? And how do I do that? So it's important to have, I think, techniques. And I was thinking about this a lot recently too because I've been working on an ever like changing curriculum and trying to decide what to include, what not to include. Because after a while, it's like you're going to have thousands of techniques if you put everything in there.
right,
So it's like what is necessary to get the person understanding the principle. To me, I think that what makes a good technique should be a delivery vehicle for the principle behind it. You can't, and again, this brings it back around to Aikido. This is something I always kind of like say with kind of tongue in cheek. It's like you can't just principle your way into principle. You can't philosophize your way into philosophy,
right,
because then that's all it becomes is just philosophy and concepts.
right,
And you have to have something that delivers that and downloads that principle into you. And that's what a technique should do. I know that after I've done thousands of reps of this arm bar, I'm not just learning and downloading the techniques and mechanics of this arm bar, but it's getting across something deeper to me. I'm understanding things about isolation and separation, and I'm understanding things about breaking mechanics as a whole, versus beyond just this one simple technique. So I use the analogy of, and people make fun of me for this. It's become like kind of a running joke whenever I'm teaching, but of soap, And
okay,
I think it's a good analogy because like if you got a bar of soap sitting by the sink, like that's not doing anything for your dirty hands. It's like not until even when you pick it up and you lather up with that soap, it still hasn't done its job. It hasn't really done its job until you rinse it away. Right. And so to me, that's, I think, a pretty cool representation of what techniques should do for you. The technique is a technique is a technique. It doesn't matter. It's like you're gonna forget so many things, and that
right,
doesn't mean you're getting worse because you forgot about techniques. You're still getting better even when you forget stuff, right? Because it's like what that technique did for you when you were learning it and going through it and applying it, that was downloading something, a deeper understanding about the principle involved in it. So
right,
it's just like that bar of soap. It hasn't really done its job until you don't even know it was there in the first place. You know what I mean?
right.
But
No, that is phenomenal. You've answered a bunch of questions. I want to dive into something else because you're talking about the approach, and I notice, like, and I know we spoke a little bit before we got started, just about me changing my approach and thinking about something bigger. Because when we start, and I don't know if you experienced this, when I started, it was very matter of fact. Like at first, it was survival, don't get smashed by, Barry or whoever. And then after I got over that phase and said, hey, this is fun, I have to stick to this, I've kind of got the bug. It's like, well, let
yeah,
me try this Kimura. Let me try this. And then slowly branching out on techniques but then I find myself coming back to things and I hit like
yeah,
the plateau. And I know when I'm plateauing because I feel like obviously everyone else is getting better, but I feel myself being stuck or maybe like I'm overtraining and my mind's just too much in it or I take myself seriously. So I guess what I want to ask you is, and I think you talked about it a little bit, how do you balance your training when you feel like you're kind of at your limits or you feel like you're plateauing? Like, what's your kind of methods for getting out of it or mindset? Like, what do you do
yeah.
to kind of get yourself back in a groove?
Um, I've thought about this a lot, and I've had people ask me this quite a bit, and because everybody feels that, everybody experiences um, anywhere from plateauing to burnout. Anything in that kind of neighborhood, I guess.
Right.
I think that personally, the way I feel about it is like there's different things you can focus on a different element of the game, and just be in love with the art and not necessarily even your progress sometimes. I think that a lot of times people think that they're plateauing or they're stagnating or they're even regressing, and it's not really accurate. It seems that way, but the perception is that they're doing that because everybody around them is still progressing at a faster rate.
Right.
Right, you go in, it's like, man, this dude's getting so good. Like I,
Right.
I feel like, and I mean, I've been doing this definitely long enough, and the older I get, I'll have somebody come in, I'm like, man, this dude's going to be a problem in 6 months. Like
Right.
I know he's already giving me fits right now, and he hasn't even been training like a couple of years, and it's crazy. But I think that you know you're still progressing, you're still improving as long as you're still training. You're
Right.
never you can't can I don't believe you can continually train and regress. That I don't think that's a real thing, but it definitely can feel like that. So when it feels like that, that's what you're really trying to solve, is that problem, is like how you feel about your progress. So to me, I again, I train in different kind of types of in different areas of jiu-jitsu. So like you were talking about, I do things with whether if I'm going to teach a seminar, it may be at a Krav Maga school, and these
Right.
people have never even experienced really, anything beyond just extreme basics of jujitsu, and they're wanting to, improve their ground game, where they're standing grappling or whatever. It may be that I'm going to work with some cops or like some kind of like military or offshoot kind of like law enforcement type group, and so their needs are going to be very vastly different than this competitive jiu-jitsu school where they're training in the gi. So I don't really get burned out because of that, because I have my toe in so many different worlds
Right.
personally. And I know that that's not for everybody, but I think that even within one aspect of, if all you do is just competitive gi jiu-jitsu, there's still so many aspects that you can
Right.
just change your focus on. It's like, yeah, I mean, maybe I'm feeling like I'm stagnating because I've been working on one specific guard system for 6 months, and I'm like, maybe you've saturated all your brain will absorb out of that particular system. So move on to a different system. Let that thing, put it on the back burner. You're not gonna, it's not gonna, it's not perishable. It's not quickly perishable. It's still gonna be there. And sometimes whenever you set it down, you come back with a fresh pair of eyes, or refreshed, like reset on your brain, then you can see things, and you can develop in it better than whenever you're just like had your nose to the grindstone in that one
Right.
specific system. But I think ultimately, though, it just requires being in love with the art, not even training, just the art. Like it's I always equated it to like, I used to say it's the kids classes when I taught the kids classes, which I don't anymore because I was losing my mind. But like I would tell them, like, if you come in and like, we're going to work on this, this one certain escape, and you've seen this escape 50 times, 100 times, and you've done it, and the coach starts teaching this move, and you're like, oh, this again. It's like, oh, I've done this a billion times. This is boring, whatever. It's like, yeah, you're not allowed to get bored. You got to find a new detail in it. You got to find something you appreciate every single time. I would see
Right.
techniques that my different coaches would show, and 15 years later, I would see the way they were showing it. And they weren't showing it inherently different, but I was able, because of the maturity that I had in the art over that time, to see new details. It's like, damn, I was missing that this whole time.
Right.
That's crazy. And that little detail was a game changer. So, you've got to, I think, appreciate that those things are there. There's layers deep on every single technique. So the thing that I would tell the kids class is like, you run up and you give your parent a hug. It's like you've hugged them 1,000 times. It's like, so is the hug not special anymore? It's the same hug. Like they're not hugging you any kind of different way. This is not a boring, oh, here's a hug again. No, it's like, dude, you love it every single time. So it's like every time that you touch the mat, you just like love that feeling. Every time you do a generic vanilla flavored arm bar from the mount, fall in love with that again. It's all fun. I think when you get too caught up in the performance, in the like, I've got to beat this person, I've got to win this thing, I've got to win in
Right.
dominant fashion, I've got to, I can't allow this person, because I get in my feels about it too. It's like if I roll with somebody who's been training for 6 months and I can't, there's an instance where I want to do something and I wasn't able to do it, like just that right there, I could get upset about that. I'm like,
Right.
damn, like I tried to do this and they shut me down. This person's been training 6 months, I've been training 30 years. Like
Mm.
they should not have been able to shut me down on that. So
Right.
but that's all ego, man. It's all ego.
I want to come back to the ego thing if you're okay, but
Yeah.
before I wanted, you said a bunch of things there that I wanted to elaborate on, but it's specifically, this goes into a question I like to ask because I get into this. How do you balance your training and focusing on what you like versus what you need to do? And I'll
Mm,
elaborate a little more. I'll see this sometimes with coaches, my coaches. When I turned blue belt, this is when I started paying attention to this. I
mm,
asked my coaches, Steve and Paul, I said, "Hey, what should I work on?" And then they said, "What do you like?" And I was just like, I mean, to train, like I don't know. But then there's things like I want to do, like open garden triangles. It's like my meat and potatoes. But I should probably work on other things. So the challenge is, should I go for things that are troubleshooting tips? Like I always get caught with this scissor sweep or something, or I can't pass this type of guard. Or should I
mm.
just do the stuff I like? So could you speak to that for a minute? Like how do you balance training what you like versus what you need to improve?
Yeah, I think I like what your professor said. Like what do you like, and that, because I think it's a good answer, because what you have to balance want versus need. Yeah, I think when people come in, they generally have people come into the gym or the academy or whatever you call the place that you train, and you ask them why they want to train, and they're going to have an answer for you. So, I want to. It looks fun, or I want to learn about how to defend myself, or I want to get in
Right.
shape, or whatever. Usually, the reason they give you is not the reason that keeps them around over time. Usually the reason they don't know what it is because they haven't trained yet. So they've got a reason what brought them in the door, but that's not going to typically be the reason for what keeps them around. So like what I mean by balancing want versus need, I think is like if if I'm a police officer and I start training jujitsu, well, I need to learn how to restrain somebody. I need to learn how to take people down. I know how to control them, hopefully safely. I need to know, certain things that are going to be beneficial to my job and to keeping people safe and protecting people and arresting people and whatever. So that's a different kind of thing than if I just walk in and I want to, I a friend of mine showed me some jujitsu and it looked really cool and fun, and I was uh, maybe an athlete or not an athlete or whatever, and I want to learn a sport. So I'm looking for this from a sport aspect. If it's just a hobby, do whatever the hell you want to do. Like work nothing but triangles for 10 years. Who cares? Like just become the guy who everybody's scared of his Darce choke in the gym because it's all he
Right.
does. Like
Captain
everybody.
Tires.
Yeah, dude, you've got those specialists that's like, oh, that dude, he sucks in every position except if he can get a Darce, he's gonna finish it. It's like one of those guys. That's fine.
Right.
Be that. But if you are wanting to compete, though, you're wanting to fight, you're wanting to do whatever, then you're gonna have to be honest about your weak areas, and you're gonna have to address those for sure. And that's what a coach should help with too. I think. I say, hey, coach, I want to compete in this thing coming up, and your coach, first of all, should say, okay, I think you're ready, and we can get you ready, or you're not ready, it's too soon, or whatever. So that's first conversation, and then they're gonna have to be kind of honest with you about, yeah, well, you everybody passes your guard with a knee cut. Like your defense against knee cut passes sucks. Like, so let's work on that. Let's work on guard retention, pass prevention. Let's work on countering these certain positions where you're getting stuck all the time. So do all that, and then once a lot of that remedial work and reparative work is done, and then you start building up on your offense, and kind of build some of that simultaneously. And it's like, okay, now we're going to get certain systems that you're good at, make you even better at them. We're going to take your strengths and make your strengths stronger, so, but getting back to the original question for like veer off too far in any other direction, I think that it's, it's about you've got to do enough of what you want to do to keep it fun enough to keep training. I hate seeing people come into the gym like look like they're punching in for a shift at the coal mine.
It's
It's
just
like,
at the
dude,
plant, right?
yeah, it's like, dude, nobody's forcing you to be here. This is supposed to be, it's even if you are training because it's part of your job, and like the law enforcement or whatever, military, like you're trying to get better at your job through this. It should still be fun. Like nobody's,
Right.
you're, and I get it to some degree because sometimes it is like I want to get better and I don't feel like training, so you still go in. I understand that, but it's like, dude, at the end of the day, this is supposed to the primary thing behind training jujitsu. Um, One of the primary things should be fun. It should be enjoyable.
Right.
But yeah, I think the environment. Honestly, people you should have a supportive environment of training partners and coaches and everything else that should make the atmosphere fun and make the atmosphere enjoyable. Even though you're there to push hard and to train and to sweat and to grind and get better, it should still be fun. But
Right. Wow, thank you. That was a lot to unpack there.
that was a couple of tangents.
Yeah, no, no. See, the reason I love doing this is everyone always answers questions I'm going to ask them before I ask them. So this is great. So I'm just like checking things off the list, right?
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about competition. I did my first competition, I think it was like my second or third month in. Might not
Wow.
have even been that long. Fun story. My first coach, Ernest, what's up, Ernest? I was training at that gym and there was a competition. It was Naga, it was a local thing. And I was like, why don't I sign up and do it? So I did. And they were there all day for the kids. And then when I showed up, he was leaving. And he's like, oh, what are you doing here? I was like, oh, competing. He's like, I wish you told me. I gotta go. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
So anyway, I had one match with the same guy. I won by points, and it was like phenomenal. And then after
That's cool.
that, I like really started focusing more on training. And I think they were trying to figure out if I was going to stick around because, there's a lot of churn. And uh, so after that, I showed my video. My coach is like, he's like, you got some stuff to work on, but yeah, let's focus. And then after that, like that connection became deeper. I felt like I was more connected to the gym. I was like one
That's
of the
cool.
boys at that
Mhm.
point. That connection's still there. I'm at a different gym now, but we still train. I still visit where him and his wife are teaching, and
That's
that was
awesome.
my introduction to competition. But
That's cool.
competition's an interesting thing because I felt like for me it was important because I didn't have that in Aikido land. So I
Mhm.
wanted to feel what I call the proving ground. Because you do
Sure.
it when you roll. Like I feel like at some level you're competing, but I heard like the nuances and the difference between competition pressure as
Mhm.
opposed to training with your buddies at the gym. So I guess my question for you is, do you think that it's necessary for people to compete? Because I've seen in my limited experience, folks progress really well who don't compete, and folks who compete just skyrocket. So I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit. And
Yeah, I've got different feelings about it. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about with what's your why of why you train,
mm,
because I think it's good for everyone. I think it's good for everybody who trains to do competition at some point. Even if it's you're going to do one at each belt or something. What I mean, or you're
right,
going to do 50. It doesn't like whatever it needs to be for you. Because I think that the big thing that people need to experience, a lot of people, that's the closest they're ever going to be to an actual fight.
mm,
I mean, it's like, yeah, we're not in a, we're not in the street and we're not, bare knuckle, like hitting each other and, whatever. There's not weapons and multiple attackers, all these crazy things, but there is the intensity of being, first of all, in a foreign environment. You get used to training. You can go into your gym like blindfolded and say, okay, that bag's over there, that chair's over there, there's the desk up there. Your
home field
surroundings.
advantage. Yeah, agreed.
Exactly. So there's that, and plus even your intense roles in your gym, they're never going to feel like a competition role exactly. I mean, even if they have the same intensity and the same pressure and everything else, it's still somebody you're familiar with,
Right.
most likely. and it's still somebody who you know is probably not going to hurt you, or not try to hurt you,
Uh,
right? You go to a competition, and from the second you touch hands with this stranger, potentially, they don't have nearly as much reason not to hurt you. They're going to come at you and with an intensity that it just feels different from the second that you lock up with them. So
right.
people don't. And, I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Obviously, competed, but I'm saying this because I think this is the reason why I think it's important for people to do it, because that's a unique feeling, and it shows you how you're going to perform under pressure.
Hmm.
I think that probably overwhelmingly most people don't perform as well in competition as they would in practice, because the stress level, the adrenaline, all the crazy physiological responses.
Right.
Some people do. I mean, there's functional sociopaths who, like, just they're the same everywhere, like, and those people make great competitors too. Absolutely.
Right.
I wish I had a little more of that sometimes,
Yeah,
but
I get
but it is, I think, that for that reason is important. Now, are you going to progress and get better without ever competing? Yeah, absolutely, you will. But it is, and you also too, you don't have to compete to be able to have access to that ability to fight when you need to, right? It's going to be buffered. I think it's going to be suppressed a little bit, because if you've never done it, then there's going to be that shock factor, to if you actually get into a fight. But the great thing about the tactile nature of submission grappling is that it's downloaded on a muscle memory level,
Mhm.
more than any other kind of, if you're doing a karate, taekwondo, whatever kind of kata, you're not touching anything except air. Your body's doing the physical movements, but it's in very little way resembling anything that's going to feel like a fight.
Right.
When you're rolling in the most flowy of rolls, there's still pressure to it. There's still
Right.
muscle memory being downloaded right there. So I think the competition, I think everybody that trains should do at least a competition at some point. Some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it, and um, some people that love it will do a lot more competition. Some people that hate it will do a lot more competitions, because it's like, that's to be honest with you, most of the reason that I competed, I've always hated competition personally.
Hmm.
I never enjoyed it. Even when I won, I didn't really. It was nice to win, but it was like, man, I didn't like that feeling. I didn't like a lot of the feelings that I experienced with it. I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of, whatever. So I would make myself do more and more and more. And I probably competed. Uh, I don't think I competed at all at purple belt. I competed.
Oh,
There weren't a lot of competitions around my area, so I had to travel to compete. So I competed at blue belt, um, and this was like '90s and like early 2000s, and then um, then I competed at brown and black. But it was always a matter of like making myself go and do it.
right.
So, but I think ultimately that's good for people. I think it's good for people.
Awesome. Thank you. That's
Mhm.
impressive. I wanted to ask you another question. And I know every gym, not to discredit anyone, every gym, every instructor, every group has their own policies and things. But for those who have access and it's okay for them based upon what their conditions are in their training environment, gym hopping. I find that when I can't compete and I want to feel different energy and I just want, like to not train with the same people all the time, to feel like I
Yeah.
where I stand, I'll go visit another gym, whether it's a new gym or it's one I frequent because, I've associated them, like my former coach's gym, or for us, we're like in a nice area where there's like a lot of gyms close by. So our open mat on Sunday, like we're just all kind of people coming in, black belts, teachers, etc. So I'll pop in those places too. Is that something that I guess you would encourage for people who have access, assuming they're in their gym that's not like restricted for some reason, like they could, do you think
Yeah.
there's some benefits to that?
100%. Yeah, there's definitely benefit. There's definitely more benefit than not. I think that there should be an etiquette to it.
Right.
Personally, I think that um, I think people shouldn't assume that it's going to be cool if you're a coach.
Mhm.
Um, hopefully it is. It should be. But don't just like um, because it is weird. We're not, old school traditional martial arts. We're like, okay, this is my master and this is my dojo and this is
Been
the only
there.
place, and I'm not allowed to even like look out there. It's like it's unrealistic, especially these days, because it's like, well, YouTube exists. So it's like I'm looking at what everybody else is doing. At
Right.
least back in the earlier days, it's like you could be a little insular about it. You could be like, oh no, this is the best. This is, and if you go anywhere else, they're not going to be teaching as effectively or as good or whatever. You can't get away with that stuff anymore. So
Right.
what is it really about if your teacher, sensei, professor, whoever, shidoshi, demands that you only train at your gym, then it's ego and it's money. So those are the only two reasons.
Right.
Um, because it's like I don't want to lose you as a student. Okay, why don't you want to lose me as a student? Just because you love me that much? You want my tuition. You want my tuition, and you also don't want me to hurt your ego by saying I'm going to go train at this other place, because now it makes you feel like, oh well, that other place has something to offer that I don't. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's not a good feeling. I understand that, but it's like um, when a student comes to you, and I know that I'm not talking exactly about what you're talking about right now, because you're talking
No,
about
no.
gym hopping and having like a home based gym.
Right.
But the idea of even leaving and going to train somewhere else it should be acceptable. But I think it just requires communication. And as
Agreed.
far as gym hopping, I do it. I've always done it
Right.
myself. I taught and trained at the same gym for 30 years before I moved out here to Charlotte, North Carolina,
Okay.
almost 3 years ago. So for 30 years, I was in the same place. Um, and the thing is, like, over 30 years, you have thousands of people that come in and out, you know?
Right.
And so, like, some of my best training partners, they left, and some, new people came in. So it's like, what's the difference? So if I go, and cross train somewhere else, now the nature of it for me is I have to, because I teach most of the weekends of the year. I'm traveling to teach seminars at different places, and so like I get a lot of my training by training with people at seminars and things like that, which is a whole nother topic. But it's
Right.
but when I'm here in town, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I teach classes out at Fit to Fight, and I train with the people there. I teach a class in South Carolina at a place called Red Wolf Martial Arts, and I train with the guys there. And then whenever I'm cross training on different days, I'll go over to like Charlotte Jiu-Jitsu, which is a fantastic gym that we have in town here, run by John
Awesome.
Piper. They're phenomenal, and they've got um, any given open mat's going to have like 50, 60 people on the mat. So it's a
Wow.
huge like sampling base. So the cool thing about that, and not only is, or it's important to find a cool atmosphere where people are, not everybody's just trying to kill everybody or whatever, or, but also they're going to challenge you too. It's not just a room full of marshmallows.
Right.
So it's, and you're going to be able, to get a hold of somebody who is going to be how you need and how you want to train that day, you know? So I think it's good to have that kind of thing, because you can really develop some bad habits by training in the same place. Not always, but sometimes, you can, um, on both ends of the spectrum. Like I can train at a place for years and just I'm top dog, and I'm like,
Yep.
nobody even gives me a challenge. So I walk around just thinking I'm hot shit. And I'm in my mind, I'm here. And then I go to somebody else's gym and, I get just mopped, on the mat with somebody in a lower rank, or, somebody small or whatever. Like somebody who shouldn't have beat me in my mind beats me. And so then what does it do? Like that's going to have a more profound impact, because I had built this story up in my head based on keeping myself insulated and with these same training partners. So that's not a
Right.
good thing. I need to have a more accurate perception of my abilities and my shortcomings, I think. So that's one thing I think that cross training at different places helps. But again, it's not something that um, it's never going to be received very well if, like, you've got a gym and your coach has invested time and energy and effort into you, and then all of a sudden he hears that, hey, yeah, we saw such and so training over at this place across town. Like, I didn't, do they not train here anymore? The coach is going to be a little blindsided by that.
Right.
So I think it just requires a communication. I don't know too many coaches. I don't want to know too many coaches that would have a student come be like, hey, should I go train at this? I'm thinking about going to hit an open mat or going to hit a class at this place over here. That would be like, no, if you do that, you're out of here. Like
Right.
that's the last thing a coach should say. Now it's if that coach wants to say, do what you want to do, like that's cool. Do what you, but I do know something about this gym that I will share with you before you go there, just
There's
so you have a
that.
heads
Yeah, that
up.
can be a little tricky.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's, it's like, yeah, well, just before you go to this gym, just realize that a couple of their coaches over there have gotten in trouble for sleeping with students or something. It's like,
Something in
or
the drama.
yeah,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah, yeah.
exactly, yeah, or this one guy got arrested last week for assault, and he's running some of the classes with it, just whatever, and then you can make your informed decision based on that. But that's all a coach I think should really do. Um, I have known places, plenty of places where it's like, okay, well, if you're cross trained, if you're going over to this place, then you're not going to get ranked from me anymore.
Oh
And
wow. Yeah, it
yeah,
sounds
that
so
that
old. That sounds more like the old world where I
yes,
was like an Aikido place, man. But
oh yeah, 100%. And it is. It's I think a lot of it is a throwback. Mostly, I think it's going away. It's not the pervasive attitude, but I know that there are definitely some, and then I don't know. I mean, there's pros and cons, I guess, but for the most part, I think that it's way more valuable of a resource to cross train at different gyms than it is to not do that.
wow. Yeah, agreed. Thanks for that take. I have another question that's just more about like I don't know if it's practical application, but I heard this when I started, and I think it's still out there, and I know the answer from what I've experienced, or I have an interpretation. Size versus strength versus technique. I
Yeah.
know, like, what am I, like 152? I know that there's guys that are like two something. I'm one of the smallest dudes in the gym, by the way.
Mm,
There's dudes that are like 200 something pounds that
yeah.
I roll with. And some of them are black belts.
Yeah.
And our roles are fun. And I know they're
Mhm.
being sort of nice to me because there's
Yeah.
restrictions.
Yeah.
But there's that concept that like jujitsu conquers all. And I think I could say some things about like your interpretation on that because I
Yeah.
know you talked about it in other things like leverage and like the physics of it,
Sure.
but there's the physics of it, right? There's math
Yeah.
and strength and ability.
Yeah.
Could
There's
you speak to
reality.
that?
There's
Yeah, like oh, this
gravity.
guy, I'm an open weight. Like I mean, I'm not at the level where I can just do whatever, right?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
still learning. I'm still on my journey, as I'm sure we all are. But yeah, if you could speak to that for a minute, I'd like to get your take
Yeah.
on the
Dude,
reality behind that.
it all matters. Like I would say, what's the maxim is technique conquers all, right?
Hmm.
And with the right explanation, I'll agree with that. Um, what I look at it as is I'm investing and I want the best return on my investment. So if I have, and my investment is time and energy, right? It's not monetary, but it's time and energy. So if I invest in strength training, I'm going to get a return on that investment. Um, it's going to have a slower, smaller return typically than is technical training, right? So if I go in and I train 2 hours a week jiu-jitsu and 1 hour a week, or 2 hours a week jiu-jitsu, 2 hours a week strength training, that's great. But like I'm getting a better return on my investment for those 2 hours of technique training. Now it's not to say that I need to just do 4 hours of technique training. I mean, I could do that instead of the 2 and 2, but um, what's going to give me the best return on investment. And so it gets confusing sometimes because they'll go in there and they'll get a hold of somebody who's just yoked and bigger and stronger and less technical, but they're shutting down a lot of your technique because
Right.
your technique is not uh, perfect enough to overcome the size and strength disparity.
Okay.
Size 100% matters, strength 100% matters, flexibility matters, speed matters, natural athleticism matters. Again, I'm going to go back to the wrestlers because they're the natural kryptonite to a lot of jiu-jitsu guys,
Yeah.
and they come in there and they don't have any submissions to speak of, but they can turn some just holds into submissions sometimes. They can pin you down and make your life miserable, and you're like, dude, like I'm here until I'm not here. They're just going to
Yeah.
keep me in this position. And as far as they'll blast in and take you down and they'll just sit there and beat you up in so many different ways without training. Well, so like so the big news over the weekend, Pat Downey. You know, I don't know if you watched that whole debacle. He he competed as a blue belt, which Pat Downey is a very decorated wrestler, obviously. And there was this controversy that he registered as a blue belt. Well, technically, he is a blue belt in jiu-jitsu. Like
Right.
so he goes in there. There were also what's her name, uh, Hannah. I forget her name, and I feel horrible about that. But she is a you know a Olympic level wrestler, and she's going and competing at Nogi Worlds at I think blue, maybe purple, I don't know. But anyway, these cases, it's like, okay, yeah. So these jiu-jitsu guys are like, it's like, well, that's bullshit. How can they go in? It's like, well, they're literally this rank, and so they have literally that much jiu-jitsu training. So yeah, jiu-jitsu it is a great equalizer, but at the same time, size, strength, all that stuff absolutely 100% matters. And I think the more realistic and the more honest we can be about that with ourselves and with our training partners and students and everything else, the better, because it sets you up with more realistic expectations. I
Mhm.
had years ago, I always think about this story. I had this student, not a physically fit, no, not a gifted athlete at all, overweight. He was just very, not very coordinated. He started training, and it did wonders for him. Training jiu-jitsu was fantastic for him. Like he actually got pretty good. He got his blue belt. He was doing pretty
Nice.
well, handling himself. He goes to college, and they have a grappling club in college. He's like, oh, cool. I get to train up here. He goes in, trains with these guys who have no formal training, just a couple of guys that probably watched UFC and tried some holds on each other, but they were way more physically fit. And, he rolls with these guys, and they just maul him, just absolutely maul him. He can't submit them. He's like getting into horrible positions, everything else, and he's just crestfallen by this experience. And I'm like, dude, the gauge of it is not, but you have more training than them, so you should have beat them, right? The gauge of it is like, how badly would you have done against them with no training? Right? Put it in that perspective for a second. You kept them from submitting you in these positions. You kept them from doing certain things to you that you would have no idea how to prevent had you not trained to the level that you were trained. So it's like, yeah, the technique is a good return, is the best return on investment, in my opinion, that you can have. But yeah, dude, I mean, there's a reason why everybody's on steroids. Like it's like, I mean, dude, you look at you go to Masters Worlds, and you can just there's a fog of TRT in the air. Just gotta like wade through it. It's like,
Mhm.
yeah, it's weird how you were always one body type until you were 40, and now all of a sudden you're jacked and yoked.
I'm in
Like
the best
that's
shape of my life because I drink insert sponsor.
yeah, right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I've got this new supplement that this company sent me, and that's what's doing. No, dude, it's the
Right.
needle you're sticking in every
Oh
day.
God. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah. And I'm
that's
not hating. Like, do whatever you want
no
to do.
people.
If there's no
Yeah.
rules against it, fine.
Yeah.
Go do it. It's cool. But don't be honest about it and be honest with yourself. If if technique was all you needed, then steroids wouldn't make that much of a difference. You
Right.
know what I mean? But yeah. Anyway, that was a long-winded answer, but I think
No,
that's how
that
I feel
was
about technique
great.
versus all
I
that.
have a bunch of things to pick apart there if you don't mind. I
Yeah.
want to talk about strength training for a little bit because
Mm-hmm.
I try to have I've been sort of working out for I guess since like high school. I'm in no way a big guy, but I feel like one of my buddies, one of my close friends and coaches, Tony Paterino, who teaches here, we call it what is it, health and maintenance or something?
Yeah.
It's like finding the balance for strength training so that we don't fall apart. Because I want to do enough so that I feel like I can maintain frames and things, but I don't
Yeah.
want to overdo it and like overwork
Mm-hmm.
my joints or just burn myself out and then like my rolls are just garbage because I'm just too sore and too beat up. So, do
Mm-hmm.
you have any recommendations? Are there things that you do? I mean, I don't know if you want to give away your secret sauce, but like what
Yeah,
do you
dude.
recommend for like
Yeah.
maintaining the body, I guess, whether it's strength training or stretching or some kind of activity that helps the body maintain? It's
Yeah, no, I'm an open book about it, man. Like I think it, especially the older I get, because like I'm not, when I was young, a lot of the problems I have were from, my I was writing checks with my body that I'm just now cashing.
right.
It's like
Yeah.
it was I would, just get in these positions. I mean, I was like 140 pounds, maybe less whenever I started as a teenager. And I would get tied into knots and folded in half and stuff. And it was fine. You're made out of rubber when you're a teenager. So it's
Right.
all good. And then, you start to like, it's like, oh, where did these like degenerative discs come from, and these compressed discs in your spine, and where are these joint problems and these tears and these
Right.
whatever, and all these knee problems and stuff like, um, and my body is a wreck these days with different issues.
Right.
So most of my time that I do is it's not the gym is not a fun place for me at all anymore. It
Right.
never really was, but at least whenever I could go in and just do whatever kind of lifting and just go for like beach muscles versus
Yeah, the look.
yeah, it's all about the aesthetics, and but that's not always the best thing for your joint health and your overall like physical well-being. So now it's a lot different, and my advice to anyone is, if you're going to train to any degree of seriousness and for longevity and everything else, especially if you're going to compete, is you got to get with a physical trainer. You got to get with a good like physical therapist and personal trainer kind of group. I've seen several different PTs over the years, and that's my only focus anymore for the most part, is going in and doing things that I know are gonna that's gonna supplement, as far as I've got my knees are shredded as far as ligaments, and I'm like, my knees just suck. I've got a right now I've got a torn rotator cuff. I've got like all these neck issues and back issues and stuff like that. So I've got to do stuff that is very specifically curated to supporting those kinds of things, so those injuries don't get exacerbated by because they're only going to get worse for the most part whenever I go in and I roll and I train. So on the back end of it, it has to be supplemental. So it's not as much about getting a lot stronger these days as it is about doing a lot of maintenance and support. I always think about, I'm doing a lot of this strength training to support these things around where I know I have trouble areas and injuries and stuff like that. So in addition to that, so what you'll do when you get a good trainer is that they will take into consideration what your activity and what your sport is. So it has to be a fairly sport specific person, not just a general overall kind of trainer. They need to actually do assessments and look at your injuries and your health history and your abilities and disabilities and your range of motion. All these things need to be taken into consideration whenever they're doing their assessment, and then reassessment. I think that's a good way to approach it, and that's what from what I've seen, because this is not an area I have much knowledge other than being on the receiving end of it. But
Right.
when I see PTs do this, and they're really good about working with their clients, and they're really good about taking into consideration like what your sport and your needs and all this stuff are, and as well as your injuries, then they're going to design you a really good program, and they're going to hold you accountable to sticking to it. And then on the back end of that, obviously the things you need to do in your personal life, which some I'm good at, some not good at, is doing all the necessary things as far as proper nutrition and hydration and supplementation and sleep and rehab and all that stuff. I mean, ideally, if you could have a good personal trainer that curates a perfect program for you, and you're hitting the right recommended amount of days, and you're doing all the rehab and prehab stuff about going to you're doing the sauna, you're doing the cold plunge, you're doing all
Right.
these things, you're supplementing with all the best kind of supplements that are actually going to help you out as far as like muscle and joint and ligament, all that. There's 1,000 things you can be doing. Now there's only three things that are going to keep you from doing those things, right? It's the difficulty of it, first of all, because it's a whole job,
Right.
to take care of your body. It's not fun most of the time. It's more fun to stay up late watching Netflix, and it's more fun to eat pizza than to eat something maybe
Healthier.
healthier. It's
Yeah.
it's it's fun to drink alcohol. It's fun to do all these things, and so you're gonna you're gonna inevitably make certain choices about how you balance those things. Um, but it's got to be disciplined with a lot of that stuff. So the more disciplined you are, the more the better the longevity is going to take hold, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That was really, really interesting. That take and thinking about like how to really understand your body and like making sacrifices, but also like taking care of your frame, right?
Yeah.
Spoke to Linda Stevens. She's a strength coach and conditioning person, and she focuses on nutrition. I did a podcast with her, and we talked about it. She said, think of your body like a performance car, like a Ferrari. Like you got to put like 93 in your Ferrari, right? You can't just put in like
Yeah.
87. So,
Yeah.
yeah, things like that. Just really taking care of yourself. Um, I know we were talking about injuries. We all get them. How do you balance your training, or how do you think your training has evolved because of injuries? Because I feel like sometimes I'm like, oh, well, my foot's sore, I rolled my ankle, or I took a foot lock or something, or so I'm like, okay, I got to be careful with my technique. I know I'm at a point where I can train, but I need to just be ready to tap or not do
Yeah.
certain things that'll put pressure on my body. I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's life. That's my life, man. Like I said before, I've got, injuries are a weird thing. Like, cause at a certain point as you get older, and this is like this can be a depressing statement. Like there's going to be a point where that injury is a thing now. Like it's a
Hmm.
it's getting better is a very relative statement because like with my back is probably my back and my neck are probably the most like uh chronic things and most debilitating things. For example, like I've got a very weak bridging ability. Bridging is obviously extremely important in grappling. So my ability to bridge is extremely compromised. So if you think about everything that you're going to have to use bridging mechanics for in grappling, like that's all extremely compromised. And in the other direction, my ability to like invert or anything remotely close to inverting is a lot more compromised than it used to be.
Right.
And I've always been quite a bit of a guard player, and so that hinders a whole lot of stuff.
Right.
So I know that I guess there's a couple elements to it. When I roll, I have to. One of the big things I have to think about first of all is like if this like I know how my back is feeling that day. I know how it's been recently. I know what the current condition of it is, or my neck, or whatever it is. And when somebody asks me if I want to roll, I have to kind of take that in consideration, and it's hard because we don't want two things. We don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, and
Right.
by saying I don't want to roll with you because you're a gorilla, like you're gonna wreck me right now. I don't have the faculties to be able to deal with it, and I know I'm gonna try, and I'm gonna wind up hurting myself. So there's that aspect, but then there's also the aspect of like you don't want to accept it yourself. A lot of the time it's like this dude's asked me to roll, and I'm like, man, I don't want to be a pansy here and be like, no, he's this or he's that or whatever. You got to be realistic about it, and you got to know like I can trust this person.
Right.
I know the pace that we're gonna go at versus the pace that I'm gonna go at with this dude over here. So you got to be realistic about that, and you've got to be honest. And if it takes explanation, communication, it's like, dude, I'm rolling really restrictively right now, or I'm rolling with this kind of restriction. I'm dealing with this kind of injury. So, no offense, but it is what it is. So I mean, there is that aspect of it, and there's also the I always think about injuries like stages of grief. It's like so you got like denial, you've got anger, you've got all these different things, and then finally there's acceptance, right? And so
Right.
when I accept that, okay, when somebody tries to pass my guard with this like specific kind of passing style, I'm gonna probably have to concede the pass a lot sooner than I would have to 10 years ago, and that's a tough thing to swallow, man, because it's like, oh man, I know what to do. And when you're in a position, when you're injured and you're like, I know what I need to do right now. I know that he's working on this, and here's how I counter it. But knowing that and talking my body into doing it are two different things at this point. So then you're gonna have to. So okay, I guess the silver lining, if there's going to be one to all this depressing talk about injuries and all this, is that it should make you more aware of preventative measures of those certain positions that are compromising,
Right.
and get you better at those preventative things. And then also, like, on the back end of it, the defenses, I got really, by necessity, I got pretty good at having an offensive bottom side control,
Mm.
so it's like, for competition, that's not great, but it's so playing things like modified octopus guards and different kind of sweeps and different kind of guard replacements and different kind of like uphill escapes and reversals, I got pretty good at doing those by necessity, because whenever I was very compromised with a combination knee back injury, that was like my pass prevention was trash. So
Right.
people were passing my guard, especially with certain kinds of passes. I saw, okay, I need to prevent as much as I can them whenever I notice they're starting to set up a certain passing style or a certain positional style or whatever. I need to start taking these precautions, because I know what's going to happen next. So maybe I can shut that down, change their priorities, and then kind of hit the Uno reverse card on them. And then on the back end of it, it's like, okay, no, I know that if they are successful in doing what they're trying to do right now, they're going to get me into this kind of position. So I need to go ahead and start making preparation so I can be a little ahead of the curve.
Mm.
Now, it's difficult sometimes to do that, because you don't want to necessarily accept something too early. It's not good jiu-jitsu is accepting too many things too early. Because you should be able to, like, change their priorities and create dilemmas that kind of steer their motivation in different directions. Stop, buddy. And yeah.
Yep, I know the feeling. I'm surprised. Pretty soon they'll both be in here, so I'm with you.
Yeah. But no, they I think it's one of those things where you just kind of have to be realistic about your abilities and disabilities. And the good thing about it, though, is jiu-jitsu has endless modifications and endless opportunities for you to be able to change your game when needed. So I feel like personally I can train and I can roll and everything else forever. But I know now that my game is going to have to evolve and to some degree devolve,
Right.
based on limitations. So, and everybody has to have that conversation at some point. We're not all Cyborg or Wagner Rocha. It's like those guys are superhuman, and
Yeah,
most people
specimens.
will not be looking like that when you're in your late 40s and 50s.
Right. Wow, that's helpful. I wanted to talk about this is something that's come up that I've experienced, and I think the one thing that helped me for my keto that I was able to carry over, well, I guess a few things. One, recall for technique, ukemi, like responding, falling safely, and things like that. The ability, because like I'm a visual learner, but taking ukemi and doing demonstrations and things like I learn from feeling a lot too.
Mhm.
So someone can do a technique on me sometimes. I'm the uke or whatever, a demonstration, and I can pick it up based upon feeling because I have a little
Nice.
bit more experience now, and I'm like, okay, this is what it felt like. Let me try to replicate that.
Yeah.
Do you think, and I've seen this, but I'd like to get your take, did ukemi, like understanding the basics of falling, like even break fall, standing in the base, forward roll, back
Mhm.
roll,
Yeah.
break fall, like is that important? Because I think a lot of people I've heard of or I've trained with, some of them I've crossed path with, were
Yeah.
worried about stand up because they gotten hurt before. They took a bad fall or they got
Right.
like, leg sweep and hurt their knee. I don't know if you want to speak to that for a minute.
I think that's it's almost a lost art in a lot of ways, because I think there'll probably be more of a resurgence in the focus on Okime,
Right.
because of the tendency, the trend now tends to be a little bit more towards stand up than in previous years. Like,
Right.
for so long, it was just like everybody's gonna guard pull, everybody's gonna double guard pull, you're gonna do all this, and now there's a lot more emphasis, especially with the proliferation of and the popularity of no gi submission grappling
Right.
over gi. Then there's a lot more focus on wrestling, and even what's cool to see too, a lot of people are focusing on judo, gi and no
Yes.
gi. That's really cool to see the integration of those kind of systems. So I think that the more focus becomes on those, then the more importance and necessity of proper breakfall mechanics are gonna like come in. Um, Again, coming up, like there was a huge emphasis on it for me in early days, because in my jiu-jitsu classes, in my judo classes, in aikido, like the break falls are so much more focused on, because of how big a lot of the throws are, so
Right.
how dynamic a lot of the throws are.
Right.
So like that kind of I think that really kind of gives you a leg up in a lot of ways as far as your ability to recover from positions. It's not just about accepting the fall and not getting hurt on it. It's also about
Right.
the recovery positionally in
Right.
those. And I think that's all huge as well. So it is unfortunate to see like people not emphasize that as much. And I think a lot of I think it'll probably be one of those things that kind of course corrects itself in the next few years, just because of the integration of wrestling and judo more than in the previous years.
Wow, yeah, that's a nice take. I've noticed that too. I posted a video, short talk about that, how my Ukemi helped, like giving
Oh yeah,
something back, excuse me, giving something back to Aikido. Because we know I poke fun at Aikido, and some of my Aikido friends don't like it. Some of them love it, but like
it's
I'm being
easy to do.
realistic. This is my, but I'm like, it's not like I don't say that I did it. I mean, you can see my
Right.
fourth dan on the wall. I'll never get my fifth because I won't send in $1,000 for the
Yeah.
certificate. I was like,
Yeah.
this is it for me. I'm good. Like,
Yeah.
proclaim Aikido master. That's it. But no, that's interesting. And my instructors, Steve, who runs, one of the coaches who runs the gym, the owner, he has a background in judo as well.
Mm.
I often ask, like, hey, can we do stand up and stand up? And the joke at the gym is, if he advertises he's going to do stand up, like classes will be like, because people are,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and like we have crash mats and things, but like, yeah,
Yeah.
people are starting to ask now for more stand up. So hopefully we'll get some of that soon.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not, it's, yeah, judo and anything that's going to require you to take repetitive falling over and over again is going to be, because that's the thing too, is like, I remember, I don't remember who said it, um, at some time, but it just kind of really resonated with me. It's like leg locks get the reputation for being the most injurious of things in jiu-jitsu and submission
yeah.
grappling. They don't even come close to falls. Like
Oh gosh, yeah.
takedowns are the most injurious thing. A
Yeah.
bad fall is going to be a pretty devastating injury a lot of
Yep.
the time, and so people get injured on falls and takedowns probably more than leg locks.
Right.
I'd imagine you can't be in the middle of taking a bad fall and tap.
No,
it's like
gravity will do what
yeah,
it does.
yeah, that planet's coming at you like
Yeah.
whether you want it to or not. So yeah, I think that's a really important thing.
Awesome. Two more questions for you. One, and we talked about this a little bit before we got on, but I'm experiencing this, and I think we all do. Like, and I may be doing this in the wrong way, but like the ego death. Because like I feel like I'm very honest about how I want to train, who I train with, my physical abilities and limitations. I do forget sometimes that I'm damn near 40, and some of these young dudes are like, "Let's go," and I'm like, "Wait a minute, I forgot, dude's like 20." Like,
Yeah.
so not just the strength and ability, but the ego death. It has to happen. One of the reasons why I wanted to come to jujitsu, because as we mentioned, competition is like the I don't know, that's the defining line that lets you know
Yeah.
who's who, the pecking order, etc. But like, what input do you have on the ego death and how to recover and how to just maintain a good
Yeah.
mindset of training so that we don't let, shortcomings like losing or tapping or whatever get in the way of our progress?
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, it is, it is one of those things that first of all, it never really happens. Like it never actually, you can't, everybody's like, leave the ego at the door, like you got to kill your ego, this and that. And it's impossible. First of all, it's about managing your ego, I think,
Right.
because like without understanding what your ego does to you, then you're never really in charge of it. You never really have like a handle on it. I think that it's delusional a lot of the time that people are like, yeah, I don't have an ego in this. And it's like, you wouldn't even be doing anything if you didn't have an ego. Like, so there's some motivational driving force. You always want to get better. You always want to perform well. You always want to feel like you you win whatever winning means, whether it's a moment in time during training or whether it's a competition like high stakes or whatever. And it's important, I think, to have a realistic view of what your ego actually is and what it is doing to motivate you. I think that
Right.
people just kind of view it in black and white terms. It's like you have, oh, he's got a big ego, right?
Right.
He's very humble. It's like those are not mutually exclusive things. It's like, now obviously, the thing about it, I think that the trope about killing your ego or the death of the ego or leaving the ego at the door, whatever it is, it's about wanting to foster an environment that is conducive to learning and helping each other.
Right.
And you can't really do that if you have a bunch of people that are just there for themselves and they just want to go out, they want to smash every single round, and they don't care about the longevity or the progress of their training partners.
Right.
Like what is it? A rising tide raises all ships or whatever the hell it is, So it's like if you go in with the right, yeah, I want to get better every time I'm there. I want to work on something. I want to improve. I want to have this level of progress. And, but I also know that by going in there and helping other people out, first of all, helping other people out, even from a selfish standpoint, is not a bad thing. I mean, it's like, I want to help you out so you become a better training partner to make me better. Right. Okay. So, all right, that's fine. But ultimately too, if you love what you're doing, you want to share it because you know how much this thing has changed your life and made your life better.
Right.
So if it's had that impact on it, then it's almost your responsibility to want to share that with other people because you're spreading something positive into other people that's actually going to help them on and off the mat. So if you have something that you've tapped into in your life, that you've been fortunate enough to find something that improved your life, that helped you in multiple ways, it's kind of your responsibility to proselytize. You don't have to hit everybody over the head with it and just become the biggest cheerleader or whatever, but to share it like selflessly.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
There we go.
there's the dog. Yeah. And buddy, you're stepping on my cord. That's the only
There you
problem
go.
with these AirPods.
Yeah.
But yeah, here you just got to be on camera. Is that the deal?
Hey, there we go.
Hey, there you go.
Hey.
So, but anyway, I think as far as that ego thing goes, it's about managing it and not allowing it to get the better of you in ways that is going to stifle your progress.
Right.
You're actually going to wind up stifling your progress because people aren't going to want to be around you, and that means they're not going to want to train with you, and yada yada. And I think that's when you see people, kind of going back to an earlier topic, when you see people changing gyms a lot of the times.
Right.
Sometimes that's because they're trying to find places that are going to be better for them. Sometimes it's because they had a falling out. Nobody wanted to train with that person. And, it's like,
yeah,
you maybe didn't get this message, but, notice how nobody's really wanting to roll with you. And people are kind of actually avoiding you a little bit
right.
because you've been a douchebag lately and you're only looking out for number one.
Right.
So it's like, I think that it's, you either figure it out or you won't. And I think if you don't figure it out, it's tough to say that you're not going to last because, there are unfortunately some big egos out there, and you can kind of see them from a public perspective. But at the same time, not to waffle on this topic too much back and forth, but it's like, you see somebody, let's use, I don't know, Gordon Ryan for an example, right? And people see some of his bravado and his braggadocio, and they see, like, man, this guy's ego is just out of control. He's just like off the chain with his ego and stuff. It's like, I promise you, he's not like that in the training room. He's not walking around like he's just, like hot shit and everybody is beneath him and whatever. There's obviously people he's probably going to avoid rolling with. And he's definitely there to improve himself more than anything. But dude's a phenomenal teacher, and you don't get to be a phenomenal teacher if there's not at least a hint of altruism in that you want to share this beautiful, wonderful thing. You know what I mean? So it's like there's nobody that's 100% anything. Nobody is, even the most sociopathic of sociopaths has that little thing inside them that is is not that way. So it's but I don't know. Anyway, I think that's my main thoughts about it. I could probably go on for a long time about that because it is a very multi-layered subject. But, I think like anything else, it requires communication, it requires a good environment, and it requires
Right.
you being realistic and honest with yourself more than anything else.
Thank you. And I know we're running up on time. I have one more question, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
I like to ask this, especially with coaches, professionals like yourself. What advice do you have for anyone up and coming in training? Like I'm new, I'm white belt, purple belt, etc. What would you like to share with anyone who's listening today that's like, oh my God, give me some advice.
Yeah.
What do you recommend? What should I do? Help.
My fiance says that this is the part of podcasts where I should be like, buy my instructionals and go to BJJ Fanatics and get my videos and whatever like that, and subscribe to my Patreon. No, but yeah, I mean, like, I think that have fun would be the biggest thing. Here you're going to be, especially these days, you're going to be drinking from a fire hose,
Yeah.
with information. It's it's unrealistic to think that anybody's going to go into a gym these days and start training and enjoy it and not want to go get on YouTube or whatever and go buy
Right.
10 different instructionals that they'll probably never watch. But but they so but it's about like there's no um I think open, clear communication, developing a communicating relationship with your coach or your professor or whatever that supervisory person is. Being the person that people want to train with is huge because those people have your best, will eventually have your best interests at heart as far as your progress and as far as your improvement, and then just having a good time and relating to you. So I mean that's going to make a much more comfortable environment, and a comfortable, fun environment is a huge thing for the progress of everybody in there, and it's for the growth of the school and for the growth of the people, like individually, I think too. So that'd be my big thing is, have fun with it. Don't take it, don't approach it like it's a job, like I've got to do this. I've got to, like I was talking about, somebody looks like they're punching in for a shift at the plant, and
Yeah, yeah.
don't do that, like have a good time, and, realize too that it's like a never ending, always evolving journey. So I think don't get too overburdened by the pressure of like, oh man, I've got so much to learn. Be happy about that. Like, man, I got so much to learn. Like, dude, I've been doing this for 30 years and not like stagnant at all. Like I've been always trying to keep my finger on the pulse of what's trending and what's developing and where the game is going next and all the different facets of it. And it's virtually impossible
Right.
because there's just too much evolution, too rapid. But I enjoy it though, because it's interesting to watch. There's nothing quite like that. There's nothing
Right.
quite, I mean, like you go to Aikido, there's not a lot of innovation in Aikido as far as
Talked about that. Yeah.
currently evolving techniques. You go into a karate school, there's not like a lot of new stuff, for most types of karate. It's boxing has 5 punches, endless combinations and techniques and footwork and all these things, but there's nothing that evolves quite as complex as jiu-jitsu. It's like there's a whole new system of how to break somebody's foot right now, like being developed. It's insane. And but that's a good thing, and that's a cool thing to experience. So falling in love with that aspect of it and that part of the process, and being not overwhelmed in a bad way, but being overwhelmed in an excited way, I think is huge. I think the same for competition. Like people have asked me competition advice, which first of all, I'm like that. I'm not the guy, but like if I do give you any kind of competition advice, is to realize, especially if you have nerves, like going out in competition, your body from a physiological standpoint doesn't really make too much distinction between fear, anxiety, and like happy anticipatory anxiety. You know what I mean? It's like my body's going to do the same thing whether I'm like excited to compete and thrilled, or whether I'm extremely afraid, and nervous, whatever. You're going to have the same physiological responses. You're going to have a rapid heart rate. You're going to, sweaty palms. You're going to be shaking. You're going to be your rapid thoughts. Your breathing is going to be erratic, and all these things. Manage all those physiological conditions, of course, so you can perform maximally. But from a you kind of trick yourself sometimes into thinking maybe I'm not scared, maybe I'm excited. I'm just
Right,
excited.
right.
That's what this is. So yeah, I think that always helped me a lot. The best I ever did was whenever I could convince myself that I was excited to step out onto the mat, to compete versus, oh, dude, I'm so nervous. Yeah.
That is awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I'm sure my viewers will appreciate this. How do people find you? Do you want to do the elevator pitch and tell people how
Yeah.
here? Obviously,
Yeah.
I'll share your links in the bio. I know you
Yeah.
have some videos and content out there, but do you want to kind of just run through it real quick?
Yeah. There's quite a bit, but I'll try to make it quick. Usually night jujitsu on any of the platforms, as far as like my YouTube channel is the biggest thing that I have. And so night jujitsu on YouTube, night jujitsu Instagram. I hate Facebook, but I've got one of those. Let's see. I've got a Patreon, night jujitsu, where I put like exclusive. Main thing I put on Patreon is like I record my seminars, and I don't
Oh,
usually release those publicly. So I'll put my seminar recordings on my
okay.
Patreon for night jujitsu. And then at BJJ Fanatics, I've got, I think, 8 instructionals now on BJJ
Right.
Fanatics. And most of them are self defense based, but several of them aren't. Like I've got one on bottom side control attacks and escapes. I've got one on compression locks, which is kind of an untapped subject in a lot of ways, like as far as slicers and stuff. So there's yeah, I think the most recent one was deconstructing for defense. It's like reverse engineering techniques. So anyway, BJJ Fanatics is that one. Patreon. I also do work, just real quick. I do a lot of work, a lot of seminars during the year is coursework that I do with a group called Knife Control Concepts.
Okay.
And it's obviously a very more like self-defense based thing, but it's all wrestling and grappling for like self-defense, empty hand versus knife. And so we do a lot of work with from the civilian side to the law enforcement to military to whatever. So it's I'm really proud of the work that I've done with that group. It's me, Aaron Janetti, and Mike Cheney, who are also we're all jiu-jitsu black belts and have backgrounds in various martial arts, and so we kind of bring that to bear on the whole system. So yeah,
Cool.
man, I think that's probably it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Professor. It's been a pleasure. Like I said, I will share your links and things in the bio. Enjoy the rest of your day. And folks, thanks for joining and tap in.